Hey guys, welcome back. It's Ripe again, back with more homeowner association stories. In this video, an HOA president tried to steal the property of a farmer and then attacks his farm animals. Let's dive right into the story. In the first story, my sister-in-law steals my diamond ring and insists that she needs it for her wedding. I, male 33, am a single child while my wife 28 female is the middle child between three sisters. My sister-in-law number 1 32 and sister-in-law number 2 25 years old. For context, SIL means sister-in-law. As much as I love my wife, I cannot deny that she has a crappy family. Her parents are mostly gone away for business meetings and her eldest sister, my sister-in-law number 1, is an addict and acts like she is the youngest. The actual youngest sister, my sister-in-law number 2, is still okay. She is impatient and stubborn, but she respects my wife and genuinely loves her. The same cannot be said about sister-in-law 1. When my wife first brought me home to meet her parents, my SIL1 was also there. While my conversation with her parents was fine, I could see my SIL1 judging me. I later got to know that after I had left, she complained to my wife how I looked like I was dating her to leech off her, in response to which my wife told her that I in fact come from a rich old money kind of family. And just like that, my SIL1's opinion of me changed. Next time I came over, she was all smiles and showed me pictures of dresses she wanted to wear for my wedding. I knew what she was hinting at, but decided to play dumb. She started to dislike me, but was never outwardly rude, maybe because she knew hating me will ruin her relationship with my wife, who was my SIL1's last resort for financial help after my parents-in-law cut off ties with her. So anyway, my wife and I have been married for 2 years when my SIL1 announced she was getting married. Immediately after breaking the news, my sister-in-law started asking my wife for funds to pay for her wedding and honeymoon. Not only was the request huge, but we had also recently bought a condo which had costed us a lot, so naturally my wife refused. This didn't go well with my spoiled sister-in-law. I came home to find her screaming at my wife in our own apartment, saying vile and disgusting things. My wife was tearing up silently and I lost it. I dragged my sister-in-law 1 out of the house and slammed the door on her face before going to my wife. It took me 2 hours to calm her down and convince her that she was not in the wrong. The next morning we woke up to banging on our door. I told my wife to stay inside as I went out to find my sister-in-law standing there with another man. Apparently he was her fiancé, which shocked me because he looked so young. My sister-in-law started pushing at the door, demanding to be let inside and talk to the two-faced witch. When I refused, she started shouting that I cannot stop her from meeting her own sister. I eventually slammed the door shut again. 1 week later, my wife gets the message that my sister-in-law wants to apologize. We decided to meet at a cafe and I called up my sister-in-law number 2, who we had told about all of this so my wife should not feel cornered. The 3 of us arrived first while my sister-in-law arrived almost an hour late and she made a face as soon as she saw the youngest sister. I did not even bother ordering something, but of course my sister-in-law ordered the most expensive drink. She then started by saying how sorry she was for being a bad sister and how my wife must hate her. She was essentially guilt-tripping my wife, saying how she was trying to change for the better, but she needed help because wedding and honeymoon were so expensive. When my sister-in-law number 2 pointed out that if they are that expensive, they can do away with them. My sister-in-law once said that it has been her childhood dream to have a grand wedding. My wife again refused, saying she did have enough funds. My sister-in-law looked at me and said that she could take my money because my money was my wife's money. My wife then explained to her that we had spent a lot in a condo recently and neither of us had funds. I thought maybe this would make her sister understand, but nope. Oh, that's wonderful. You can give that condo to me as a gift. You won't have to pay for my wedding then, only chip in for the honeymoon costs. Yep, she actually said that. We were both dumbfounded at her words as she kept on saying how much she needed a larger space for her and her boyfriend and how she had always dreamt of living in a condo. Seeing us so quiet, my sister-in-law too decided to interrupt. Yeah, they should hand over their house and savings to you so you can marry your barely not a minor boyfriend, smarty. That statement made me curious, but it was not the right time. As my both sister-in-laws started fighting verbally, my wife suddenly stood up. I've never seen her so furious and determined, and it made me proud to see her taking a stand. I've heard enough from you. I should have cut off when you came at our apartment that day, but I thought maybe you were just upset or something. Me and my husband will not be paying for you or handing you over anything. The most I can do is attend your wedding and wish you a happy life, but if you don't want, that's fine as well. Now please excuse us." We left quickly after that and spent the remaining day in bed together with our phones silenced. Over the following weeks, my sister-in-law number 1 grew increasingly pushy and began to bombard us with messages demanding that we hand over our condo, insisting that she deserved it more than we did. When we continued to refuse, she began visiting my wife's workplace, making a public show of crying and begging, painting my wife as the cruel sister. I suggested a restraining order, but my wife wanted to wait for that, still hoping that her sister would stop. One day at work, I received a message from my wife that my sister-in-law was visiting, asking me not to worry. Despite that, I ended my work early and rushed home, but my sister-in-law was gone by then. Apparently, my sister-in-law had invited us to her wedding and even left us a card. But over the course of a few days, we kept getting messages that the wedding date was postponed until my sister-in-law said that they would not be having a wedding, just signing the documents. We both thought that maybe this was all turning out for the better and things would change until one day after 2 weeks of receiving the card, my wife noticed something strange. Her wedding ring was starting to get rusted when it was made out of pure gold. She panicked and we went to the shop we bought it from, only to be told that the ring was a replica and not the real thing. My wife was devastated, thinking she has misplaced her ring, while I was furious because I knew who had done this. We immediately filed a case with the police and I gave them my sister-in-law's address as a suspect. Both because I wanted to make it clear to her that she could not mess with my wife without consequences, and also because I knew my sister-in-law was growing 14 cannabis plants in her house. The next day we were called in to meet my sister-in-law, who was screaming how she needed the ring more than my wife for her wedding. We were handed the diamond ring back and were informed that on top of theft, they found cannabis in her house, expected, and the boy she was sharing her joints with was 17. Disturbing. When the police had arrived, they were both really high. My wife was shocked at all of this and I decided to take her back home. We didn't get to know how long my sister-in-law was supposed to be in, but she did try to fight her case by selling her apartment, but ended up losing it and was then fined for even more. She also tried to reach out to her parents, demanding her share in the property, but instead got a restraining order. It's been quite a few years since all this chaos and we haven't heard anything from her. I hope we never do, because she was nothing but a burden for my wife and an annoyance for me. And yeah, Ripe Stars, if you enjoyed the stories about crazy entitled people, then please don't forget to like the video and maybe even post a comment, because that would help me tremendously. Thank you so much. This story is titled HOA President Shoots Farm Animals and Calls Police on Farmer. In a small town of South Africa resided a peaceful community filled with the typical HOA regulations and rules. Each house was almost identical, the front lawns were always perfectly manicured and the streets were always clean. But there was one problem, and you might be wondering what or who this problem was. Of course, me. It was I who was the problem, and problem for who, you are asking? Well, of course, for our beloved HOA president. You see, I'm a farmer who had lived on my farmland for decades. The land had been passed down through my family for generations and held a great sentimental value to me. However, the HOA president, a wealthy businessman, had always despised me and my farm animals, as he saw them as dirty and disruptive to the order of the community, whatever that was supposed to mean. Now, I must say that his opinion was not of the majority. Most people of my community and even the HOA had a good relationship with my ancestors, and they respected my family for the work we did. But this new HOA president was not only too high class, but also too influential, and thus no matter how sometimes people tried to defend me and my animals, the president always found some strange reason to have arguments with me, and the local police authorities will have his back. He had also tried to buy my family's land from me several times, as if I will hand over something so valuable to him after he had been so dismissive of my family's legacy. But it seemed like he had enough of me turning him down. The HOA president somehow snuck onto my property and began shooting my farm animals one day. I woke up to the sound of gunshots, it was well past midnight, and came running out to see what was happening. I was horrified to find the HOA president standing there with a gun in his hand, surrounded by the dead animals. It was a devastating sight, and my heart sank as I saw my beloved animals lying lifeless on the ground. But he was not done yet. The HOA president then called the police, claiming that I was secretly selling drugs. I was taken away in handcuffs because, as I said, the local police worked mostly for him, but since they found no evidence against me, the charges were eventually dropped. I then approached the other members of the HOA and they assured me that they will talk to their president and hopefully none of this will happen again. I don't know if they talked or not, but the HOA president continued to harass me, demanding that I sell my property or move out of the neighborhood immediately. I obviously refused, not only because of the land, but also because it was not me who was in the wrong. I couldn't just leave after this psycho killed my animals without any repercussions. But there was barely anything I could do against him. I was not part of the HOA, I did not have any connections, and I was not wealthy by any means. So I tried to avoid him as much as possible, but as time went on, the HOA president's harassment and intimidation tactics grew more aggressive and violent. He would drive by my property at all hours of the night, shining bright lights and making loud noises to keep me awake. He would leave notes on my door and make anonymous phone calls to me, threatening that he will kill me if I don't do what he says. I kept track of everything he had done, recording phone calls and installing CCTV in all discreet places. Though I was quickly losing all my faith and almost decided to move when one night I woke up to the sound of glass breaking in my bedroom. Without even thinking, I reached for a shotgun I keep near my bed. After the incident with my farm animals, I was extra cautious and leaped off the bed. I could barely make out the silhouette of the man in front of me, who seemed to also be holding some type of gun. At that moment, I did not think twice and I ended up shooting the man somewhere near his legs. I did not want to kill the man, both because I'm not as low as him and also because I knew it would cost me everything if I did. I immediately switched on the lights and saw the HOA president on the ground cradling his bleeding foot. He was cursing at me, saying how he was gonna have me locked up for life. I honestly believed him in that moment because what I could do if the police, who was supposed to protect people like me, worked for him. But it seemed like luck was on my side. Since the accusations of both parties were so serious, the case ended up being taken by the higher authorities who, good for me, were not bribed by the HOA president douchebag. And I know that because I saw him trying to bribe them, but was shot down immediately. Me and the HOA president were finally on the same playing field, and he tried his best to paint me as the culprit, but I had enough evidence against him. The case of him killing my farm animals that was brushed under the rug was opened again, and though I did not have any evidence of him killing my animals, the carcasses were already disposed of and I had not installed cameras at that time, he was still charged for breaking into my property. The case was not easy or short by any standard. The HOA president had hired himself a lawyer, and while I was also appointed one, his one was clearly more experienced and powerful. At one point I even thought I might lose the case because the HOA president was bribing any witness that he could, but it all came to a head when some of the people of the community, who he thought he had bribed, exposed his deceit by presenting an audio recording of his henchmen who were trying to buy them. The case very quickly tilted in my favor, and the HOA president, in his fit of rage, ended up firing his own lawyer. And it all went downhill for him from there on. He not only lost the case and was fined for multiple offenses, but he was also fired and blacklisted and his properties were seized. He was convicted of his crimes and sentenced to several years in prison. All this did not bring back my animals or help the nightmares I still get, but at least this HOA president's reign ended and my community could finally take a breath of relief. The HOA elected a new president who was more in touch with the needs and concerns of the community, and though he has his own setbacks, he is at least not hell-bent on ruining my life. And yeah, Ripe Stars, it is absolutely disgusting to see HOAs always trying to take advantage of farmers and making their life miserable. It seems like farmers are really the people that an HOA often hates the most, for whatever reason. Anyway, the next one is an Am I the A-hole story, and it is titled, I Destroyed a Playground. So me and my fiance recently bought a house. The house has a plot of land next to it where a 2-car garage that burned down a few years ago used to stand. The previous owner, rather than rebuilding the garage, decided to build a small playground on the land for the neighborhood kids to use. Apparently it became pretty popular, but seeing as we don't have kids and have no plan to have them, we obviously have no use for the playground, so when me and my fiance moved in, we quickly took the playground down. We are planning to rebuild a new garage as it is something everything we really need. This caused a small uproar with parents in the neighborhood. Some of them were yelling at us, telling us that we cannot take it down as it is part of the neighborhood. One neighbor even tried to call the police, claiming destruction of public property. From what I heard, she was told it was not public property, it was on our property and we can do as we please. We've been getting a lot of crappy messages from some of the neighbors, but honestly we have many reasons to not want this playground. Number one, I work long nights as a nurse and usually only get a few hours of sleep during the day. And this may make me sound like a monster, but I don't want kids' screams and playing in my yard while I'm trying to sleep. Number two, there is liability if the kids get injured or worse. We could get into a lot of trouble. Number two, it's a complete eyesore. This is not some professional store-bought playground, it was made using old equipment that the previous owner and some of the neighbors found. Most of the equipment was very old and rusty, which again can get me into trouble if one of the kids gets sick or injured. So, am I the a-hole for taking down a neighborhood playground? Comment number one, not the a-hole. If the playground was so important to the neighborhood parents, they should have banded together to buy this side of land, or they should re-erect it in their own yards. Comment number two, not the a-hole for your reasons listed. It's your house. If a kid breaks his arm on your property, you'll get in trouble. I would imagine your insurance would go up a lot just from it existing. No idea how to handle the neighbors, but you cannot leave it up to appease them. Is the playground still intact anywhere? Maybe one of them will be willing to put it up on their lawn instead. They won't, but hopefully it helps them understand your point. And yeah, Ripe Stars, I would agree that's a fairly good point. If they are so hell-bent on having this playground, just put it on their own property. That's probably the best decision. Anyway, let me know what you think about this in the comments. Do you think that OP is the a-hole for essentially destroying a playground, which sounds really bad in the first place but actually isn't, or not? Let me know in the comments. And now let's move on to the next story. It starts like this. There are only a few things that can actually get me angry in this world. Messing with my parents is not only on that list, but pretty much on top of it. My parents are in their 80s but healthy and still managing to live in their own home alone. While I don't live with them and never met their neighbor in my entire life, he only had to do one thing to become my sworn enemy. I guess he thought messing with the two old people next door would mean he could get away with it without a single problem. He was not expecting me to get involved in the fight though. My mother called me one day telling me that the neighbor had started putting up posts saying it was where his new fence would go. The only thing is that it was way onto my parents' property and it would end up digging half of their driveway. They have a little bit of an odd driveway where it wraps all the way into the back of the house since their garage is back facing for some reason. His new fence was going to be where my parents had concrete and would not allow them enough clearance to get the car back to the garage. On the behalf of my parents, I decided to go next door and talk to the neighbor myself. My idea at the time was maybe if he realized that they had somebody helping advocate for them, he would realize they were not such an easy target and back down. I still think that it might have worked if I was a big strong-looking guy instead of a guy that's friends call him String Bean and looks like a light breeze could knock me over. Me? Excuse me? I want to talk to you about this new fence you are building. Neighbor, are you the guy from the company? I thought you were coming over later, but I can show you where I want it so you can order the right amount of wood. Me? Actually, I'm the son of the couple that lives next door to you. Your fence plan is way on their side of the property, and I wanna just tell you that if you build that fence, I'm gonna make sure that you don't get away with it. He expectantly laughed in my face and closed the door on me. I just wanted to be nice enough to give him a fair warning before I moved forward with the process of destroying him. I know that he did not see me as a threat, but he must have had something in the back of his mind telling him that there might be a problem because he put off the actual destruction of land and building of the fence. My wife was a lawyer, and when I went home, I talked to her about what steps would be best to take in order to make sure that my parents' land got saved and neighbor did not get to bully them. I wanted to right away get a lawyer that was in that field. My wife was part of the family court, so did not handle things like this and sue him. I was obviously angry and needed to be calmed down by my wife, who told me that before anything happened we had to get a reputable land survey. If we went through a private company or just by old markers on the ground, it could become a problem in court. Unfortunately, it took a while to get the survey, and in the meantime neighbor, I guess, was not worried anymore and started destroying my parents' property in order to build his fence. When the report came back, it turned out that not only did my parents own the land he was building the fence on, but also they owned a small portion of the neighbor's property as well. I took the report and brought it to the neighbor, warning him one last time to stop what he was doing and pay for the repairs for the damage he had done. I guess this guy was pretty cocky, because even with proof in front of his face, he did not care and told me not to come to his house again or else he would call the police. That was fine, because I had no intention of coming back to his house, and instead I was now going to find my parents a lawyer. I know that this was technically their fight, but I got so invested and basically took it over. They are old, but they are fully capable of fighting their own battles. I just decided to take this one personally. Anyway, I found a lawyer, and after explaining the situation and showing the paperwork, he told me that this seemed pretty open and shut of a case. A formal document was sent to the neighbor requesting to put a stop to this construction and pay the money for damages. Once that got ignored, we were able to take him to court, where a judge would force him to accept what was on the document. There was no question of if he was going to have to stop and pay to fix my parents' driveway. With what the survey found out though, there was something else potentially at play. Neighbor had a pool in his yard, and while there is no law against that, it ends up crossing where the actual property line is. That means if my parents wanted to, they could request in the same court hearing that in addition to the fence, his pool was also encroaching on their property and they want it removed. I think you can all guess what I would choose, but it wasn't my choice since I was not the homeowner. My parents are both sweet people that if they found this out in any other kind of situation, they probably would have just done nothing and let things be. I had to get my pettiness from somewhere though, and you can bet that it came from my dear old mom and dad. They figured if neighbor was going to be a total a-hole, that they could play the same kind of game back at him. With that, the suit was filed and we just had to wait for the day to show up in court. Again, since it wasn't actually my lawsuit or property, I had to sit in the back and was not allowed to say or do anything. That was fine though, because the lawyer I got for my parents was more than capable of destroying the neighbor. The only defense he really had was his survey that was from an unreliable source. When he tried to argue, there was no way for him to know that his was not accurate. My lawyer showed that he signed the certified mail that included a survey as well as legal documents stating to stop his construction. His other argument was that he needed a fence to be placed there due to other reasons like noise problems. I could almost hear the judge laugh at the thought of my two elderly parents being so loud that a fence would need to be built. It did not matter because him having a fence was not the problem. He was allowed to build one just on his own property. It was when the judge said that the pool also had to be removed that you could see neighbor finally realizing he was not going to win. He had to pay to have the driveway fully repaired, his pool removed, and a new fence was built now much closer to his house than he wanted it to be. My parents were just happy to get some peace, and I was glad that the neighbor learned not to mess with them. Just because your neighbors might be old, that doesn't mean that they are easy targets to take advantage of. They are capable of fighting their own battles and usually have a bunch of people in their corner to help. And yeah, ripe stars, these are some of the people that I despise the most. The kind of people that take advantage of the elderly. So that's why the result of this story is even sweeter. I have no sympathy or empathy for anyone that takes advantage of elderly people. And with this, we have reached the end of the video. However, if you cannot get enough of my content, please check out my endless playlist, where you can find thousands of hours of content. In addition, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel to not miss any of my daily uploads. Thank you so much in advance, and I hope to see you again tomorrow.